Good morning, students. In this lecture, I will explain what are logical fallacies. Logical fallacies essentially are instances, examples of bad or poor reasoning. It's important to understand that there are two kinds of logical fallacies. One that we call formal, the other one informal. Let me give you an example of a formal fallacy. A formal fallacy is a fallacy, an error in logic that occurs because of the structure of the argument. So there is a problem in the structure of the argument. To give you an analogy, think about errors in grammatical errors. For example, some people write, my sister live in Canada. Now, where is the mistake? It's the subject-verb agreement. There's no agreement. So to correct that mistake, you would have to say, my sister lives in Canada. Subject-verb agreement. So that grammatical error is comparable to a logical error where you make a mistake based on the form of the argument. We study this, by the way, and examples of formal logical fallacies are invalid arguments. Remember, all invalid arguments are invalid because, given the premises, whether the premises are true or they are false, the conclusion of that particular argument does not follow from the premises, even if the conclusion is true. Okay? Let's say that, let me give you an example. Manhattan is an island in the state of New York. Okay? That's true. My children go to school in Manhattan. That's also true. Conclusion, therefore, City Tech or NYU, let's say NYU is in Manhattan. Now you notice that even if the premises are true and the conclusion is true, this is an example of an invalid argument. It's not valid because the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. Remember that for an argument to be valid, the conclusion must follow from the premises. In this case, it doesn't follow from the premises. Even if it's true that NYU is in Manhattan, it doesn't follow from the premises. So that argument is a formal logical fallacy. Let me give you another example. People who are severely allergic to nuts do not eat nuts. That's true. Michael told me that he does not eat nuts. Therefore, Michael is allergic to nuts. This is a kind of a tricky argument. Some people might be tempted to say, this is a good argument, it's no problem. The conclusion follows. But if you think about it, the conclusion doesn't follow at all. Michael told me that he doesn't eat peanuts. He didn't tell me why. he didn't eat nuts. He doesn't eat nuts. Maybe because he doesn't like them. It doesn't follow that he's allergic. Maybe it's a choice. We don't know. The argument doesn't say anything about it. Consequently, we are not entitled to that conclusion. And so the point is that this is an example of a formal logical fallacy. So the fallacy, the error, the logical error lies in the structure of the argument itself. On the other hand, informal fallacies are fallacies that occur for reasons other than the form. There is some bad reasoning going on, but it's not part of the form. So you have to analyze the argument and think about what is wrong with the argument. Let me give you a few examples. Now, the following examples are the examples, most of the examples at least, that I took from your textbook. Let me actually clarify what I mean. The fallacies are my examples, but the fallacies themselves are from the textbook. There are, I don't know, hundreds of different logical fallacies. What I did is that I took the most popular ones and listed them in this lecture, in this PowerPoint presentation. There might be more. There are more, in fact. But I only chose the ones that your textbook, some of them, most of them, they are listed in your textbook. Okay. According to Gordon Ramsay, eating meat is morally permissible. Therefore, eating meat is morally permissible. This is an argument. Now, let me give you another argument. According to Einstein, abortion is always immoral. Consequently, okay, do not get an abortion or you're going to commit an immoral act. This is another argument. Now, I'll give you a second to think about what's the problem with these arguments. It seems on the face of it, there's no problem because, okay, if a person says eating meat is wrong, therefore, eating meat is wrong, right? According to Einstein, abortion is always immoral. So it follows that abortion is always immoral. But there's a problem with these two arguments. Problem that we call an appeal to authority. So when your argument is based on some kind of authority, or to be more precise, your reasoning relies on the authority, on a certain authority, like in this case, Gordon Ramsay and Einstein. Your argument is fallacious. It commits the appeal to authority fallacy. In other words, your argument is not a good argument because it relies on the saying or the opinion of some people. Now, here is a distinction that I want to make. When an argument relies on relevant authority, some people might accept the argument. It might not be a bad argument. As a matter of fact, think about when you write a research paper. What do you do when you write a research paper? You collect information, you collect data from outside sources. Or in other words, you say, so and so and so argue that the situation is such and such. In other words, you rely on other people, on authorities. They have to be relevant, of course. In this case, in this particular case, the authority in question is not relevant. First of all, Gordon Ramsay, I'm sure he's a nice man, he's an intelligent man, but he's not an expert in morality. Secondly, most importantly, Gordon Ramsay is a biased authority because he is a chef and he cooks meat, and consequently he is going to recommend eating meat. So we cannot accept this argument. It would be a bad argument. Similarly, the second argument is also fallacious because it relies on the authority of Einstein. Oh, but it's Einstein, right? Possibly the most brilliant human being ever that ever lived. All the same, Einstein was not an expert in morality, and so we don't take his word for it. So any argument that relies on some authority, you always have to ask yourself whether, first of all, the authority is biased or the authority is relevant. Otherwise, it might be a fallacious argument. Okay, let's move on to the next fallacy. Jeremiah argues slavery is morally permissible. And why is that? That's because virtually everyone considers slavery a moral practice. Another argument. People have believed in God for millennia. That's true. I don't see how so many people could be wrong. Therefore, based on the fact that so many people believe in God, God must exist. Now, the problem with these two arguments is what we call an appeal to the people. In other words, the reasoning, the argumentation is based on the opinion of the majority. I hope I don't have to tell you that what the majority says and what the case is are two completely different things. If people go crazy tomorrow and spread a disease, actually that just happened. It's the coronavirus. Let me give you another example. If people go crazy tomorrow and they all say that leprechauns exist and they put money in their checking accounts, everybody, you're the only one who keeps saying, no, leprechauns do not exist. That's your direct deposit. It's not the leprechaun. Well, it's not going to make the existence of leprechauns true. So the number of people that believe that something is true is totally irrelevant or false. And any argument that relies on the opinion of the majority is a fallacious argument. Okay? Is it true? It is true that this man committed a crime. However, consider this. He never knew his father. His mother died. He has been poor for his whole life. Therefore, people of the jury, you should acquit him. Well, what's the problem with this argument? The problem with the argument is that it tries to convince you of the conclusion, which is to acquit him, to acquit this person, on the basis of pity. Okay? Oh, pity me, look how miserable I am. Therefore nothing. Okay? An argument cannot be valid on the basis of how bad you feel. Reasoning is reasoning. It's like mathematics. It's like I say, yeah, I understand that 2 plus 2 makes 4, but look at me. I'm miserable. So 2 plus 2 must be 5. You are not going to accept that argument, okay? Just because it's based on how sad, I'm sorry, I am. It's not going to do it. Okay, the next one, 2 examples. First example, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you do not convict this person, you may be this killer's next victim. Or your boss saying to you, you should not go on vacation in August. Why? Well, let's just say that you might come back and find your desk clean. Now, what's the problem with these arguments? Well, the problem is that each arguer is trying to make you accept the conclusion. On the basis of what? Not on the basis of sound reasoning, but on the basis of force, a threat. You go on vacation in August, you come back, you don't have a job. You don't convict this man, you're going to be the next victim. You're going to die. See, these are threats. And once again, an argument should be valid on the basis of its merits, its reasoning alone, not the any sentimental or aspect or threat. Okay, the next one. Scientists have not proven that ghosts do not exist. Therefore, they do exist. And the next argument. Since its inception in 1984, SETI is the study of extraterrestrial, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Okay, so SETI has never found extraterrestrial since 1984. They've been sending signals in space to try to find extraterrestrial intelligence. Never got any sign of it. Therefore, extraterrestrials do not exist. Okay? What's the problem with these arguments? The problem is that you don't know. You don't know. Scientists have not proven that ghosts do not exist. It doesn't mean that because they have not proven that they don't exist, it would be hard to do, by the way. Therefore, they exist. It's not by default. On the other, another kind of example is that just because you have not proven that something exists yet, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Okay, it's not by default that we say it doesn't exist. Okay, so these kinds of arguments, another example, no one has ever found life on Mars. Therefore, there's no life on Mars. Well, we don't know because we're not there. We haven't searched every single inch of Mars, so we don't know. So the fallacy here is called appeal to ignorance. Okay, so here the problem is to claim that something is the case or is not the case on the basis of the fact that it hasn't been proven otherwise so far. Let's go to the next one. Well, it's time for a decision. Either you contribute $10 to our environmental fund, or you are against the environment. Another example, either you drove here or you walked. You didn't walk, therefore you have driven here. Another example, either we enforce death penalty or we find convicted murderers back out on the streets. But we cannot have murderers out on the streets. Therefore, we must enforce the death penalty. Now, notice something interesting about these arguments. Is that these arguments seem to be valid arguments. Take the first one. Either you give me $10, or you are against the environmental destruction. You don't give me $10. What follows? It follows you are against. You're for environmental destruction. Okay, so either you give me $10 for environmental fund, or you are on the side of environmental destruction. You don't give me $10, what follows from that? You are on the side of environmental destruction. So the argument seems to be valid. The next argument is the same thing. Either you drove here or you walked here. It should say walked. Okay, that's a typo. Okay, or you walked here. If you didn't walk here, what follows from that? That you drove, right? So the argument is valid. However, what is the problem? The problem is a false dichotomy. It's an either or a black or white argument. Sometimes you have two options, and that's all you have. For example, when they invite you to a wedding, sometimes they make you decide what you'll have, steak or seafood, and you have to decide. You have to check the box. You're not going to be able to call them up and say, "Hey, I don't want either of them. I don't want fish. I don't want steak. I want tofurkey," for example. No, because that's not an option. You have to work with two options. Okay? Another example. Either you have a car or you don't have a car. There's no other option. Either you are a college student or you're not a college student. Many other examples where you have only two options. But what happens when you have more than two options? And they tell you that you have two options. For example, either you contribute $10 to our environmental fund, or you are against our cause. But clearly you have another option. The option is, I am for your cause, and yet I don't want to contribute $10 to your fund. The second example. Yes, it is true that I didn't walk here, but those are not the only two options, walking and driving. What about cycling? What about helicopter? What about swimming? Right? So there are many other options. You're telling me that I only have two options. So it's a false dichotomy. It's an either-or fallacy. Either we enforce death penalty or we find convicted murderers back out on the streets. Well, those are not the only two options. We can, for example, give life sentences without parole. That's another option. So when you have more than two options, but the argument says that you have only two options, then you know that that's an either-or fallacy. Let's move on to the next. If God is love, and love is blind, and Stevie Wonder is blind, then Stevie Wonder is God. The doctor told me I need amino acids, but acids corrode your stomach, so I'm not eating amino acids. And the doctor is wrong. All feathers are light. Whatever is light cannot be dark. Therefore, feathers cannot be dark. Logic is the study of arguments. My parents argue a lot. Therefore, I can learn logic from listening to my parents. By listening to my parents argue. What's the problem with these arguments? Well, the problem is an equivocation on words. People say that God is love and love is blind. When they say that love is blind, they don't really say that love is blind in the sense that love is blind like Stevie Wonder. But following that logic, that equivocation of words, it follows that Stevie Wonder is God. Because if God is love and love is blind, and Stevie Wonder is blind, anything that is blind is going to be God, not only Stevie Wonder. It's just an equivocation of words. Another example, the doctor told me that I need amino acids. That's true, but amino acids, by amino acids, we know what we mean. Those are the building blocks of proteins. So these are not acids in the sense of like bleach, for example, okay? Or any acids that corrodes your skin, that corrodes things. Okay? Amino acids don't corrode you, don't corrode your stomach. That's an equivocation on the word acid. Let's take it out of context. All feathers are light, yes, but light in what sense? They're light, they're lightweight. So the equivocation is on the word light. So whatever is light cannot be dark. True, but here we are equivocating the word light, because in the first premise light is in the sense of weight, and in the second sentence, we have light in the sense of color. Logic is the study of arguments, true, and your parents argue a lot, but the arguing of your parents is not the same thing as the study of arguments in logic. That's the equivocation. Okay, the next one. Each member of the orchestra is excellent. Therefore, the orchestra is excellent. But you see, that's not true, because each member can be excellent, but the ensemble might not be excellent because they don't know each other. They haven't practiced enough to be good, to be tight. Drinking this glass of whiskey cannot harm me. Therefore, drinking cannot harm me. Every brick of that house is relatively light. Therefore, the house must be light. Now, what's the problem with this argument? Problem is what is known as composition. And the fallacy of composition occurs when you say something about the unit, and you try to apply to the whole. Okay, so let's say that you have one apple, and that apple is red, okay? Then you say, then all the apples must be red. This actually, it's a better example of something else. The point is, if it applies to the single unit, it doesn't mean that it applies to the entire unit. A brick might be relatively light, but it doesn't mean that a house that is made of the same bricks is also light. Okay? So this is a fallacy of composition. All right.